folks. How's everyone doing? Testing microphone. Seems that it works. All right. Well, thank you all so much for carving out the time to be here this afternoon. Buenas tardes a todos. Mi nombre es Luz. My name is Luz Reyna. I'm the Executive Director of East County Rising. For the shout out to some of our board members who are here, our founder, and Hugh Harris, and I saw a staffer, Spencer's around as well. But shout out to you as well. But yes, so for those of you who have not heard about what East County Rising is about, we are a community-based organization based in East Multnomah County, which means East at 82nd. And so our job is, so we started as a political action committee to, our job is to help mobilize historically underrepresented voters, to help recruit, train, and run progressive candidates of color to run for office, and help transform leadership and how decision making is done. And so we've been around for about a year and a half or so, and so really I'm excited to be here and tell you a little bit more about our work, and also I'm excited to be here along with our fellow panelists who will also be sharing a little bit about their lived experiences, about their work, and how that has contributed to what they're doing today. So just a few logistics. You might be hearing some noises, some shuffling around outside. They'll be cleaning things up and setting up for a wedding. So just so you know, if in case you start hearing, shuffling, and we'll do a Q&A at the very end. So save your questions for the end of our panel discussion. So without further ado, I'll turn it over to our wonderful panelists.
Great, and we're just doing intros right now? Okay, awesome. Hi everyone, I'm Reyna Lopez. I'm the Executive Director of PCUN. We're the Pineros y Campesinos Unidos del Noroeste. Everyone's going to be tested on doing that later. No, I'm kidding. We're the tree planters and the farm workers of the Northwest. We've been doing our work for a while now. We started in 1977, but our union was really founded in 1985 by 80 farm workers who were fed up with the way things were going in the workplace and in the immigration system, and they decided to start their own union despite the fact that they didn't actually have the legal rights to have a union, which is really a testament to our Si Se Puede values, and very excited to be here today. PCUN today, we represent farm workers and Latinx working families through community building, increasing representation in elections, and also through systems change.
My name is Eddy Morales, and I feel really lucky to be on a panel of all women. How did I get out here? So that is really an honor. I'm a Gresham City Councilor, and I'm the treasurer of our state party, not to be confused with Tobias Reed, for those of you who were there this morning. I serve on the board of Planned Parenthood, and along with my partner, we like to consider ourselves volunteer community organizers and political and philanthropic donors to different things that we care about. That's all I got to say.
He's got some more to say later. Hi everyone, my name is Chrissy Erguiza, and I am the chair of the Asian American and Pacific Islander Caucus with the Democratic Party of Oregon. Moving forward, I'm just going to say AAPI for Asian American Pacific Islanders. A lot of people don't understand the whole alphabet soup when I say that. I go by she, hers, and hers, and I just wanted to let people know that the AAPI Caucus is about 5 years old, and when I was growing up in politics, I started phone banking and knocking on doors way back in 2004. So I grew up in this political mainstream climate, and kind of expanding my horizon into the new electorate, where we could touch base with different communities that may not be so mainstream, is something that is challenging within a political party framework, but I think it's definitely doable. And one of the main things that makes me so happy to be the chair is that the reason why we started this caucus was because way back in the day, Dr. Thuy Tran ran for House Representative, and this was during the primary when Jessica Vega Peterson was running, and realized that there wasn't any caucus or representation within the DPO when it came to Asian American Pacific Islander issues. And so a lot of folks banded together, the former executive director of APANO, Christine Chen Ryan, all sorts of folks started this caucus to increase representation. And right now, we don't have anybody in Salem from the AAPI community, not in the Senate, not in the House of Representatives. And so that's something that I would like to see changed at some point in the future. The last person that was in the Senate, I believe, is it Jamie Lim? Jamie Lim, and that was 2009 when he exited. So I have been very blessed to be in this position just because it has opened doors for me to be a campaign manager for Daniel Wynn, who ran for city council in Lake Oswego and is the first person of color elected to serve in that position. So I think that this is where we put our words into action, because representation does matter, and it was one of the main factors. Having him elected was one of the mandates to see a DEI task force for the city of Lake Oswego to set up. So it has this rippling effect, and I have more to say, but I'm going to send it over to Annie.
Not trying to usurp the microphone.
Sorry,
I'm Annie Naranjo-Rivera, and I wear a lot of hats, so you may have seen me in different roles, but I'm here today on behalf of Unite Oregon, which is an amazing organization that is actually the merger of two organizations that were also amazing. So in 2016, Oregon Action formed together with a group that had come together around organizing immigrants and refugees after 9/11, and they created Unite Oregon. And Unite Oregon primarily works with the immigrant communities, refugee communities, and the working poor and people experiencing poverty to organize them and build political power and break down the barriers, the systematic barriers to systems change, and help to elect progressive folks and bring those voices to the table in a lot of these underrepresented communities. So I am serving as the statewide census equity coordinator for the We Count program, which will be organizing around the state to make sure that everyone is counted. So in Oregon, we've got 1.3 million people who have been determined to be hard to count populations. So that's just about a third of our population. So we're going to be wanting to make sure that those people are counted for a lot of reasons, which we'll get into a little bit later in the panel. But just a little bit more about me. I live out on the coast. I'm a mom. Some of you may have seen my cute baby strolling around. And I'm the vice chair of the Tillamook County Democrats out there. And I'm passionate about progressive issues. We've got some Tillamook County folks here, so I want to make sure that we see the barriers torn down that prevent people of color and underrepresented people who have been systematically oppressed from gaining a voice at the table. So that's me in a nutshell.
Thank you all so much for being here. I mean, I look around, I look at the panel and think this is the future of Oregon politics. There's a lot of current community organizers that are doing the work right now that I think are starting to transform what Oregon is looking like and what's going to look like in the future, And so that's the purpose of why we thought of the idea of putting together this panel, because we're looking at the growing electorate, not only in our country, but in Oregon. And so in our state, when you're seeing a big discrepancy about who's representing and who's living in these communities, it's the community organizers that are starting to help break down some of those power, the imbalances. It's starting to address those power inequities, starting to address, racial and economic justice, and the restorative solutions on how we can solve issues that are rooted in poverty, rooted in racism. So I'm just so fortunate to be on this panel with these amazing leaders. But this work is done by organizers, and these organizers have a lot of lived experiences that I also want to be able to talk a little bit more today. So can you, and we'll start with you, can you tell me a little bit about how your lived experience has informed your work in community organizing?
Wow, that's a big loaded question. I think that, and it's such a simple question too, because I think that a lot of my reason for being here is the same reason why everyone else here. It's personal. It's really personal, and I have always been of the mentality that I was on this world, I was put on this world for a purpose, and it was really to make it a little bit better and leave it a little bit better than I found it. And that was the values I was always raised with. My parents both came from Mexico. They came here in the mid-'80s, really following the migration of farm work, and eventually we settled in Salem, where I saw a lot of injustice and a lot of segregation, frankly, in Northeast Salem. Northeast Salem is kind of where all the communities of color are. It's where all the low-income communities are, really, too, very concentrated. And it's not just Latinos, but it's also Black folks, it's Vietnamese kids, it's Cambodian kids, folks from the Marshallese Islands. It's a very diverse community. So you can imagine, I get pretty angry when people say that Oregon's a very white state, because it's just not true. It really erases the communities that are diverse and that are really living together in these very concentrated areas. So that, I think, was a big influencer in my life. But then going to Willamette in Salem as well was a total culture shock for me, because I went to McKay, where it's a majority minority school, and going to Willamette was like, whoa, it wasn't just not brown kids, but it was also very wealthy kids. And that was like the double whammy for me, where I was like, wow, this is different, but tried to blend in as much as I could. You can imagine I really didn't, and that's where I made a decision to major in politics, and we have to do an internship for a political science major at Willamette, and I ended up at Senator Ben Westland's office in 2007, and was the only brown person, I think, besides Margaret Carter in her office, which was really cool to see her, and also Abel Gordley. I was just like, wow, these women are so amazing, and really looked up to them going over there, but was the only Latina in that space. And I remember back then, it was one of the largest May Days we've ever had, because it was when they took away the driver's licenses. So it all kind of comes full circle, right? And I remember looking out the window and from the little office and just seeing this sea of people. I've never seen so many people there. Even since then, I've never seen so many people there. And I knew that was the moment I was just like, I need to be out there. What am I doing in here? I need to be out there with my people, organizing. And pretty much after that, I mean, I did have a very glamorized notion of what organizing was until I had to do it. And it was just literally blood, sweat, and tears, as everybody knows. But after that, I went off and worked for the Bus Project and was knocking doors all over the state, and really just got my scraps there, right? My battle wounds. And that is a lot of the work, honestly, that informed the way I community organize now in the Latinx community. It was learning from a lot of folks that weren't from my community, actually, and trying to have this mad science of that with my lived experience, with what works with Latinos, and trying to put that all together and making it my own, right, for us, by us. So, yeah, that's how I came to be.
Good story. So how my background affects my organizing. There's this belief that I hold very close to heart, and it is that people who are directly affected by the issues are the best people to lead us in the solution and the outcomes of that. And I'll say that because, like I'm sure many people on our panel and in the audience, I was brought up in a family that was plagued by poverty, by racism, and xenophobia. I was born the 9th child of a Mexican immigrant family. I was the anchor baby, just to reclaim that, in East Los Angeles. And, you know, unlike I think some other immigrant stories, or just the way that we tell the immigrant story, my family left an entire system back home of support, of family, of heritage, to come to a place where they were othered and isolated. And those things slowly started to chip away at a family that had been religious and spiritual, that had been civic leaders back home, and business. My father was a construction worker owner, and slowly the family started to feel the effects of that. My father became an alcoholic and very abusive to my mother. And for those of you who haven't heard the story, my mother is my hero. She is the most courageous person that I know. With $200 in her purse on one midnight, without speaking in English, she said, "We're getting in this car and we're driving north. We don't know where we're going, but we're getting away from the situation." At the same time, my brothers had joined gangs, and so she wanted to get them out of that. And we ended up in Oregon when I was in the first grade, in Woodward, across the street from PCUN. You know, I became the first in my family of a lot of things. The first to graduate high school, the first to go to college, the first, well, you know, to own and have a home here, first to come out. It was in college that I learned how to organize. It was in college that I, for the first time, didn't feel like I needed to pray myself out of a situation or to take responsibility for the things that had happened to my family. I was given a frame of how societal and systemic systems were keeping our family the way that they were. And 20 years ago, I remember the moment where I said, I'm going to dedicate the rest of my life to breaking down every single one of those structural systems so that no one has to experience what I had to go through growing up. So it's something that I continue to live. I feel really honored that I get to do this work, and I've been doing it for 20 years. And Hugh and I, my partner, just started working out 2 months ago. And I'm not saying this because it's a health kick or anything, but one of our friends, Dolores Huerta, got arrested at 87. And Hugh and I looked at each other and we said, we have to be fit. Because when we're 90 and 100, we want to be getting arrested. But not only that, we want to live to see our victory. And we want to see our victory and to be with our friends and our family and our loved ones to like take in that moment. And so that is sort of my vision, my trajectory of my life. And I'm so glad that I got to share a little piece of it with you.
Thanks for sharing your stories. It's the first time I've heard your stories, so I'm just like, oh my gosh, all my memories are kind of rushing through my head just because I'm always on like autopilot when it comes to just the urgency of now when it comes to politics, and it just pulses through my blood. I come from a family of immigrants as well. My dad is from the Philippines, and my mom grew up Southside Chicago, and right now my Chicago genes are not working in this weather. I'd rather be on the Pacific Islands right now. You know, the story of my dad is really interesting just because I didn't grow up with him. I grew up with my mom, who, you know, she's white, and trying to navigate that as somebody who is biracial was kind of an interesting way of growing up, because my mom would always have to explain, these are my children, and you know, people wouldn't make the connection. And then, you know, not having grown up with the culture of my dad, you know, I didn't have that history to, you know, really grow up in that culture, and so people would always kind of stereotype you like, oh, you must know and speak the language, or do you know about this place in the Philippines? And so I always felt like a piece of me was always missing, just because, you know, I grew up in Oregon, and I didn't really have a lot of, connections with people that had experiences like mine. My path to getting into politics really wasn't from my dad, actually. My dad came here because Mama Lily packed up their bags the day before and said, you're going to the United States. And they had no idea, my dad and my uncles had no idea, because she knew if she told them, they just run out because they didn't want to come to the United States. But as most matriarchs do, they make you do it, and you're going because I said so. And so, like what Eddy said, they came. Yeah. You know, shout out to all the you know abuelas and mama lilies out there. You listen to them. But they came here with like no foundation. They were pretty well off in the Philippines, and I see the sacrifices that my mama Lily made. But you know, they didn't have any language for that migration. You know, it was here to live the American life and have a better life than what you would have here in Manila. So anyway, going back to my mom, she was a single parent. My parents divorced at a very young age, and raising 2 kids that didn't look like her, and just had to navigate living in poverty, not having a degree, you know, trying to find daycare and going through the whole process. And like you, like my mom is my rock. She's like my best friend. She's probably watching now. And she decided to go back to college, get her degree in political science. I still don't know why. But it was one of her teachers that said, you know, if you're going to do political science, that's great. But, you know, if you really want to learn how to do politics, get out of the classroom and go join something. And so this was during the 2004 campaign during Carrie Edwards, which was a sad time because we didn't win. But she got involved with, you know, the very basics, phone calling, canvassing, and when you are a single parent, you bring your kids along. And so I literally was raised in campaign mode and by the Democratic Party. And so thank you all to, you know, you help raise kids. So who would have known? We had a little baby back there too, so who knows? So that's how I got involved, and so it's just really interesting working this mainstream politic, and then also growing up biracial in a predominantly white framework, even though, you know, we people of color are here. But there's been a lot of deconstructing because I have been raised outside of, you know, what my dad's culture is. And so it's shocking to have to do that. But, you know, it's really healthy at the same time because we all see each other as friends, as family, and we're here, you know, wanting to, you know, define our own narratives. I will use the example of this table. This table was not here before. And so we've all heard this saying of, you know, like, if you're not at the table, you're on the menu, or, you know, bring your own folding chair. We just brought our own damn table, all right? So I am hoping to use that as, you know, the plight of, you know, our work moving forward.
We did bring our own table. So my father was a political prisoner in Cuba, and he is a refugee. He came over under the Carter administration. And when he was dating my mother in Minnesota, where a number of the refugees that came in were sent to attend college at the University of Minnesota. At the time, the landscape in Minneapolis, where I grew up, was such that interracial couples were targeted, and they would, you know, have their car graffitied, and, you know, there was a lot of fear for people like my mom and my dad. But they did end up getting married, and I'm the oldest of 5. We were desperately poor. The people who came over from Cuba had their educational records wiped, basically. So an example that I like to share, I had a good friend growing up whose parents had both been practicing doctors, physicians in Cuba, and they both had to redo their medical school in the United States before they could practice here. So that happened to my father as well. And, you know, we were a really working poor family. We were all 5 of us able to attend the best college prep school in the state of Minnesota on full scholarships, which was this miraculous opportunity for us to be educated with the top 1%. So we were, you know, sitting in class with people whose parents were the CEOs of Fortune 500 companies and were professional athletes, and Bobby McFerrin's son was my friend who's now playing Hamilton on Broadway. So those are the people that I had the privilege of growing up with and being educated with, and we were taught that we could do anything. We were taught we could go to school anywhere we wanted to go in the country or the world, and that we could accomplish anything we set our minds to. And it was true because we believed it. But every child deserves that opportunity. So my commitment with the white privilege that I did benefit from is to take my lived experience and to translate that into breaking down those oppressive systems. So that's a little bit about why I'm passionate about this work. So in terms of how I've done that, grassroots organizing around the country has been really interesting. There's the sort of traditional model, and there have been sort of hubs throughout the country where they've broken that apart and tried new things. So, you know, the people who passed the Clean Water Act in 1972, Clean Water Action, it ended up being, they literally decided to take clipboards to the door to talk to people in the community about their water and about having clean water for everyone. You know, pretty basic concept now, but at the time they were like, let's take these clipboards and go knock on strangers' doors and ask them for money and build power so that our legislators will listen to us and pass these regulations for our water to keep our communities safe. So I'm from a long tradition of all the work that I've done of doing kind of unconventional grassroots organizing. So I'm from Minnesota. I've organized in Wisconsin, Washington, Oregon, here and there for a lot of different campaigns, but basically environmental justice, racial justice, economic justice, and social justice. And where those things intersect, like the work that we're going to be doing here around the census, pretty all of our organizations, that's really powerful if we can be representing all of those and pulling those threads together. So, yeah.
Thanks everybody for sharing your experiences. I always think that that's such an important thing to share, right? Because every single person in this room, and if you're live streaming in, every single person has a story that has informed in some way, shape, or form what we're doing today, you know, or how that has influenced our decision making and how that decision making has led us to where we are and what we're doing with our work. And so, you know, some of these lived experiences have informed our worldviews. You know, in a world, right? It has helped us envision a world that we want to see for our families, right? For our communities, you know, in these spaces where we're seeing that, you know, we're the only person of color. You know, I always ask myself, how can I make sure that this space is more accessible, that we're being more inclusive? Because we cannot be carrying the weight all the time. And so when we're talking about organizing, we're helping share that power. We're helping bring people into the circle and share that power to distribute it and make sure that people can participate in decision-making processes. And so with that, I wanted to ask you all, can you tell me, or can you speak about a time that you've mobilized a wave of new voters and new community members throughout your work?
Thanks for that question. Yes, definitely can talk about that. There was one campaign that really left a mark on me. It was the Measure 88 campaign, and the driver's license issue just keeps becoming this reoccurring theme in my life. After we were able to pass a driver's card, different than driver's license, back in 2013, basically within 24 hours we had heard Ofer was ready to go and ready to put us on the ballot, and they succeeded in putting us on the ballot. And it was a fight we were not ready for, frankly. And because we got a really awful title, because we didn't have money to really run this campaign, nobody wanted to touch it, nobody wanted to support it, and it was very difficult. But I would say that despite that, it was also a really important campaign for the Latinx movement, because it was also the first bilingual bicultural ballot measure campaign in the history of Oregon, which was one win right there. Two, we actually had a campaign that was full of bilingual, bicultural people who were directly connected to the issue. So this was before New Motor Voter, by the way, so we started off with a lot of voter registration and getting people registered to vote, which was one big hurdle at the time that we needed to get through. And we were going to the places that our community was going. We were going to the Mexican rodeos, we were going to the taquerias, we were going to the pulgas, the flea markets, and getting people registered there, starting off with the message of the driver's card. And people connected with it. People were registering to vote. There was one day I got like 100 people registered at all Latinos, all young people that were like, yeah, I want to vote for this. And despite the fact that we lost really badly, we won something really amazing, which was we made the Latino vote go up a tiny little bit. It wasn't even that much. It was like 1% or something, but it was so significant, and it also laid the groundwork for us starting to build up our 501c4 capacity, which was the work that we started to do to run campaigns, parallel campaigns for candidates, specifically candidates of color. And that was the groundwork that was laid for House District 22 for Teresa Alonso Leon's race, the first migrant, indigenous, Latina to represent the first minority majority House district in Oregon, which we were looking at the numbers after the campaign in 2016, and because of the message that we were going to the Latino voters, many of these people voting for the very first time, low propensity voters, people who never felt engaged by the process, in those precincts, we saw the Latino vote double. So for me, it was like, wow, these very specific things that we're bringing together, this can be taken to scope, and it has been on other races. And we won Teresa's one successful race, but we also haven't won everything with it, because we are trying to build something that's long term. And when you're trying to build something that's long term, the best learning comes from the losses. And the long game is really important. It's important for us to remember that, because we have to define our wins, especially when we have to talk to folks afterwards, and everybody wants the explanation and wants to tell you how you could have ran your campaign better, right? Everyone's laughing because you've been there. But for us, our win was that just looking at that precinct and saying, wow, we've doubled the Latinx vote, and next year we're going to double it again, and eventually we will get to a place where we are building that voter block.
So inspiring, Reyna, and you're exactly right. Like, as organizers, I think our job is to constantly be putting people together and connecting people with networks to one another, sharing stories like what we just did now, not to remind ourselves of why we do it, but to connect with other people around the shared experiences that a lot of us have, and to craft values and a vision for what we could be doing together. And so as organizers, our job really is to build the organizations and the institutions that can hold all of that beyond any one election, beyond any one campaign. And so most recently, Hugh and I were living in DC for 12 or 13 years, and could have lived anywhere in the world, but chose the city of Gresham. And part of that was because I had two sisters there, and Hugh had grown up there, and our mom was there, and so we came home. And we continued to stay involved nationally and at the state level. We were eager to get involved with anything we could. That's how I landed at the state party. And the 2016 election happened, and we were watching that election result with my family. My sister, who will just turn 60, it was her first election. She just became a citizen and voted. And my nephews and nieces, who are all U.S. born now, but married and have mixed status families, were watching it. And as the election results came in, tears filled our house. My great nephews and nieces were worried about the fact that their dads were going to be deported. And Hugh and I looked at each other and we said, we're going to be okay, and your gunkles are going to work harder than ever to make sure of that. And for those of you who don't know, gunkles is gay uncles. And we started to host people at our house. And the first set of people that came were a lot of teachers and people who worked in sort of human services, and saying there's a fear in the community. And Shirley and John were some of the first people at our home. But the first time we did it was like 35 people who came, and we did it again. And finally we said we could keep meeting like this and have respite from the situation, or we could do something about it. And so we created East County Rising through the storytelling, through the sharing of values, and through, more importantly, the vision of what we thought Gresham and East County could be like. Immediately we said we're going to make it a membership organization, and it's going to cost $20 to join, and we're not going to assume that low-income and poor people can't fund their own movement. And so we went to people, and we have members on public assistance, and we have people who pay their $20 on a payment plan. But we have over 500 people who showed up to join this organization. In 1.5 years, we've run 22 people for office and have won 20 of those elections. Wow. Completely flipping 5 school districts out there, and really getting representation. So I'll tell the story of why I ran in like 2 minutes, or maybe less than 2 minutes. Yeah. So when we first started, we were trying to recruit people to run, and really no one wanted to do it. It's like the Chamber of Commerce is really powerful. We have businesses or reputations here. We're going to be attacked. And Hugh and I looked at each other and I said, well, I have nothing to lose, let's go. And so I decided to run for office. And I was brought up believing in people, having a huge amount of faith in people. And one of my mentors, Steve Phillips, who wrote a book called Brown is the New White, and everybody should read it, makes this argument that we spend billions of dollars trying to win over conservatives and swing voters, while meanwhile, we could invest a portion of that in communities of color and progressive whites, and we are the majority of this country. And that if we do that and win that way, then we can pass progressive policies. So in my head, I knew this, I believed it, I was part of that campaign to make that book the #1 bestseller. And, but then when I ran for office, a lot of people were telling me, don't invest in low-income and poor people, they don't vote. Don't invest in people of color, they don't vote. And we ended up raising $150,000 for my campaign. And we invested all of that in low propensity and new voters. And I was like, I preach this, I should do it. And on election night, I lost my election by 1,500 votes. And there was this moment of doubt that I had in people. I said, I did what I believed, and some people were right. People of color and low-income voters didn't turn out, and I lost. And the next day, I was only down 500 votes. And then the next day, I was down 250 votes. By the end of the week, I was up 12 votes.
Oh my gosh, that was so hard to watch on Facebook.
It was hard to watch, it was hard to live in. I was in bed, I was like, bring the champagne, bring the tequila. and I felt this guilt that for a week I had doubted our people. And when we were given a list of whose votes were being challenged, there was about 350 people on that list, and over half of those were people with Latino surnames. And it was people that we had talked to and had told us they were going to vote for the first time for us. And so we thought, oh, well, we're never going to get people to volunteer. Everyone's exhausted. We put out an email, and over 50 people came to the campaign office and said, we're going to go chase all of those ballots and make all of those votes count. We ended up winning with 59 votes. And we were the last race to be called in the state of Oregon. It was after Thanksgiving. And there's one person in particular, and I won't say his name, but I call him Mr. 59. He was working at the blueberry farms. It was the last day to retrieve his ballot, and he had forgotten to sign it and never voted before. And he said, Luce was tracking him down, and on that last day, she said, I'm just gonna try one more time. And he answered, he goes, I've been on the blueberry farm since 4 a.m. picking blueberries. I get off at 4. I have my ID with me. If you can get me down to the county office, I'll go and I'll make sure my vote counts. And we did, and it counted. And so for me, he's always my 59. And we've just kept it going, and I keep in relationship with the voters and the people who supported me. And I think that's your point, Liz. We just have to keep organizing. It wasn't just about my election. And so, yeah, thanks for letting me share that story.
You're right, it was probably more special for you than it was for me watching on Facebook.
I was sweating it.
Yeah, I know. I'm just like, oh, come on, Eddy, let's go. Thank you, number 59. The question, I forgot what the question was.
So tell me about a time where you helped mobilize a union.
Yeah, I tend not to put coalitions together. I tend to join them and have everybody else join them. So I think what was really important for me this last election cycle was Measure 106, making sure that our OHP recipients had the full range of healthcare available to them. And I attended the CSUPWEDE panel earlier today, and Reyna said something really, really profound, and I want to echo that again, which was, people will turn out if they see their issues on the ballot. And when you are attacking the most marginalized communities on OHP, when it comes to, messing around with their family planning services, you bet your ass we're going to come out and we're going to organize. And so I know that the coalition that was put together was the same coalition that was behind the Reproductive Health Equity Act. And I think there's, this is something where, it's not just, the Latinx population or the AAPI population or whoever the population is that when there are issues that are intersecting, we all need to band together and unite and make sure that we protect each other, and not just to be on the defensive side all the time, but to also, be on the offensive and, defining things on our own, by our own framework, and making sure that people recognize that. And so, I don't put coalitions together. I join them and I tell people, come on, make the party bigger. And I just wanted to also say something to what Eddy said about, investing in communities that are overlooked. Anybody who's a campaigner in here knows that they want to reach out the 4x4 voters. They are the low-hanging fruit because they vote time and time and time again. But if you talk to any organizations that are from, more, I don't even like using the term marginalized, but underrepresented communities, it's the fact is that people don't reach out to them. So I'm going to share a fact about 2016 and that really dreaded 2016 election about APIs. So we're going to use the example of Wisconsin. So Trump won Wisconsin by 22,748 votes. There were approximately 70,000 Asian American Pacific Islanders who live in Wisconsin, and a group that was not reached at all by the Clinton campaign. If you talk to people who are part of the Asian American Caucus or the AAPI Victory Fund, you will hear this, that Asian Americans are tended to be overlooked. We are silenced. We are typically invisible. We don't see a lot of representation in our media. And I'm seeing it again in this cycle. Already. We need to invest and make sure that we don't overlook everybody, because this election will be the most significant election of our lifetimes. We need to invest in making sure that we tear down the language barriers. I know that. I can't speak to my grandma because I don't speak Tagalog. But if I had a way to show her something in Tagalog, well, she's in the Philippines now, but my other family, my family is in LA, they'd probably have more access to knowing how to be civically engaged. It's that simple. Invest in communities of color. And it's really hard in a two-party system. It's really hard when we talk to all the political wonks that say, reach out to the people that always vote. You know who you're missing? 70,000 Asian American Pacific Islanders. Those are voices that need to be at the table. I guess I'm really mad, but I'm gonna head over to Annie, who could maybe amplify it.
All right, well, I'm not the most mad person on the panel, so that's okay. I am going to talk to you about something that did make me mad and also something that I'm passionate about, which is the race where I managed Casey Gemmas' campaign for Senate in Senate District 24 in 2017. So Casey Gemmas, some of you guys may know, is a well-respected Somalian immigrant refugee leader. He's also the executive director of Unite Oregon. Who I'm here on behalf of. But in 2017, he decided to put in his name to run against Rod Monroe, who was the incumbent senator in Senate District 24. And Rod Monroe is an older white gentleman who had been serving for a lot of years and wasn't really in touch with his changing district like we would want him to be. And so Casey put his hat in the ring. Now, I got involved in the race because I was contacted by some progressive friends who said, hey, we've got this really well-respected friend, maybe you've heard of him and the work that his organization has been doing for years, and he's been blacklisted. And I was like, what are you talking about? Well, he's been blacklisted by the consultants and people who do fundraising in the political machine that we have here in Oregon. And not only that, but he hasn't been able to get access to the voter file from the Democratic Party of Oregon. And I was in disbelief. Now, my experience should lead me to a different conclusion than just being completely shocked. But the reason I'm bringing this up is because, first of all, this story has a somewhat happy ending. We've made a lot of progress on that front. Casey's race brought attention to the fact that even the best of us, a lot of the people in this room, were part of an infrastructure that was systematically preventing poor people, immigrants and refugees, people of color, women, and newer people to the political process from running for office against typically white, male, wealthy incumbents. So we've been able to start breaking some of that down, and you will be happy to know that this is the first election where all Democrats running for office will receive access to the voter file. So if you want to run for office, doesn't matter who you are, you will have access to that. So that's been a huge victory. And I just want to talk about some of the dynamics in that race. So we've made progress on the structural side. But Casey lives in a district where there are a lot of immigrants and refugees, and there are a lot of working class people. Now, we ran a really strong field game, and we didn't have a lot of funding because some of the people that typically get involved in these types of races, for a lot of reasons, didn't want to engage. So with low funding on the ground, we had huge teams of dedicated people, Somalian mothers, bringing out all of their family members to huge community gatherings and going out knocking doors. We had literature printed in 8 different languages. We had multilingual canvassing, multilingual phone banking, and community organizing that hasn't been seen in the state of Oregon before this campaign, and we showed what is possible. So with a campaign that has very limited funding, and as Casey says, could stretch the dollar, we were able to do that. And so with the kind of funding that we know is thrown around during election season, we can do better. And in 2020, this is the election of our lifetime, so I'm really excited about what the possibilities are, and I think that that race was sort of pivotal in showing what can be done. Now, how that impacts voters on the ground, we were out talking to people who had never voted because no one has ever knocked on their door. In East Portland, a lot of these people have never had their door knocked on, ever. No one has ever knocked on their door. We had progressive canvassers coming in from inner Portland, and they were saying things like, oh my God, I didn't realize what it was like out here. This is what it's, you know, we had Pete Lee, who's the vice chair of the Democratic Party of Oregon. He came and canvassed for Casey, and he said, these roads look the same as some of the rural areas I've been out in CD2 for Jamie McLeod Skinner. I mean, I had no idea that in Portland, we have roads that look like this. And, you know, there's places where there are no sidewalks, and I saw a family trying to get to a bus stop with their stroller and their kids and their grocery bags, and there's no sidewalk, and it's dangerous. And people just have no idea what the reality is until they get involved in a race like that. And, you know, the incumbent had not lived that reality, and Casey has lived that reality. So it's really important that we get our voice at the table, but that we have people who have that lived experience that our voters can relate to, so that when you go to the door, you say, we know the issues that you're living through. And when you bring that messaging, that working class messaging to voters at the door, then you can activate them. So it's not just only knocking on their door, but knocking on their door with something that they can relate to, and making sure that they know that we are listening.
Awesome. All right, folks, we have about 15 minutes left before the end of our panel discussion, so I want to open it up for Q&A. So if you don't mind, tell me your name, tell me the question, I'll repeat it into the microphone so our people on our live stream can hear it.
My name is Shannon Corn from Polk County. I really just wanted to do a shout out to Reyna and PCUN and specifically APP. I ran the Salem Kaiser School Bond Measure campaign, and we realized one of the main focuses of the campaign was equity in the school system, and we realized we couldn't win that on our own. And so we partnered with PCUN and APP, and they knocked on doors in Northeast Salem, Spanish language households, and I think that will be something we can bank on from here on out. And it was a low cost investment, but it was a wonderful relationship to forge.
Awesome. Thank you, Lauren. So just to reiterate, so you've been working with this Kaiser School Bond, and you want to give a credit to PCUN for helping out with that bond. Reyna, do you want to respond to that?
Yeah, just a quick thing. And it was, in comparison to what you could have given a consultant, right? Hundreds of thousands of dollars, making sure that we had $20,000 so we can talk to these Latinx household families meant that we were bringing in new voters for the very first time. And AAP is our fully bilingual bicultural program where we specifically go and talk to Latinx voters about issues, about candidates, and many of them are voting for the very first time. And the school bond was an issue that parents clicked with right away because they knew that they were taking their kid to McKay High School and their kid took them 10 minutes to walk out to a portable that smelled like mold, and that we needed to rebuild our schools in Northeast Salem and really all across the district, but the ones that were the most marginalized was that school. We had a great time talking about that. It was like such a fun issue to work with the campaign on, and I think that you're right. That is a model for what we can do in the future, and we got to keep doing it.
And then the bump in each of those precincts was the difference. It absolutely was.
Sorry, hand up first.
So my name is Evan. I'm the chair of the Marion County Dems, and echo what Shannon said about PCUN. In 2014, you're talking about the 1% difference. That got Representative Evans elected in Polk County, and that was the difference. He won by 700 votes, and that wouldn't have happened without you all. So thank you. And I know that I speak for Shannon in Polk County and Marion County that we're all on board for making sure that we work hard to make our parties and our communities and all the governance around that reflective of our community at large.
Thanks for your question, Evan.
Hi, Henry Exurgian, fundraising chair of the Multnomah County Democrats. I was wondering, so I mean, you know, what we would really want optimally would be to have civics back in public schools as an important subject. Are there any programs that reach out to schools and start getting kids involved in civics and educated? So that way they can also educate their parents, perhaps.
So I apologize for anyone that's watching from home from Unite. I just started with them recently, but I do know that we have been partnering with a group of young Somalian students in our East Portland office, and we have 3 different offices, but we've got a pretty great program, and they're going to be brought in for our census organizing. So, you know, they are already part of the community, and they've been doing organizing amongst the students and the kids and the families that way. And then we're also doing organizing with parents. So we've got a lot going on with that. And then we've got our pilot program also, which is bringing in immigrant and refugee community leaders and training them. So a big part of that is teaching them how we can build models to start civic engagement early and make sure that people are being registered and being activated and that they know what's going on and what the process is. So we're going to be doing, it's an 8-month program, the pilot program, and it's run in partnership with the city of Portland. So we're going to be doing a whole, month by month program to get more people engaged. So.
I just met somebody, I've actually known her for a while. She used to be a high schooler at Sunset High School, Alexandrian Goddard, and she was Suzanne Bonamici's, I think, guest of honor of one of Trump's inaugurations. But anyway, she is really passionate about gun regulation, and so she started her own business to empower youth through this despicable epidemic of gun violence. And so what she is doing is actually touching base with high schools and high school students to go in and talk about voter education and also civics as well. I think it's just two-pronged. You need to have civics back in and making sure it's more empowering when you have youth doing it as well. That's how I got started in high school. I just said, hey, I'm registering voters in government classes, so be it.
So two things. One, we have a Secretary of State election happening, and that's a great question to ask at the debate tomorrow. Two, I think what you're really speaking to, Henry, is not just how do we teach people civics, but how do we change the culture of participation and agency and people feeling like they have the power to say what's on their mind and to demand what they want. And to demand it by boycotting, by taking action, by voting, by volunteering. And that's not going to happen through a civics class. That's going to happen through the work that like East County Rising, PCUN, Unite Oregon are doing, and the party is doing, which is hard work. It's like going to somebody, walking people through the process, getting people to connect the dots of the grievances they have with voting or volunteering or donating, and saying this is how you get it done. Like that is not, it's hard work, it takes a lot of time, but doing that is how we're gonna get to the place where we're doing this. The other thing is, and again, Reyna said this earlier, like not just cutting off the relationship once people take the action that we want them, like people are not disposable, right? But like continuing to build community, continuing to build collective action so that people start forming relationship, people start forming community. And through those actions and winning stuff together is how we change culture, right? And so that's what we need to be doing. An organizer friend of mine told me this. He goes, people are a pile of undigested experiences. They go through life and every day something happens to them and something happens to them and something happens to them. And as a good organizer, our job is to help people process all of those experiences into meaningful things that give people purpose and direction. And so,
yeah, do I have time to say it?
Okay. I was just saying, great. I wanted to just give a shout to one of the programs over in the at Capaces. I think that a lot of this work is about making sure that we find people a political home. And the work of the Alianza Poder, which is the network of 8 sister organizations that PCUN is a part of, we're not just PCUN, the Farm Worker Union, but there's also Farm Worker Housing, there's the Capaces Leadership Institute, there's Latinos Unidos Siempre, the youth empowerment and organizing program that really came out of a fight from against the school to prison pipeline. And the unfortunate thing about focusing too much on schools providing this is that our kids are getting kicked out of these schools. They're getting pipelined into deportation or into prison. So we had to create our own structures to not just talk to people about civics and like how you participate in that way, but also how do we do it in a way that values our culture, that decolonizes our minds, that makes us empowered around who we are. Because frankly, school like gives you all kinds of complexes about who you are and in so many ways. So we created this program called Turno, and Turno is specifically working with a lot of farm worker children who now are in high school. We're talking to them about the movement, about how Capaces came up and everything from 1977, from the first PCUN organization to today, and also the tactics, not just voting, but direct action. And we're even going as far back as taking a lot of these kids back to the fields and teaching them about our indigenous practices on how we used to farm when we were back in Mexico, before we got caught up in this system of capitalism and it being all about exploiting the people, the land, the money, the things, right? So it is more holistic, but Turno is a really awesome program that I'd love to talk more with folks about. And now the Capaces Leadership Institute also has a program called People's Representatives. It's nonpartisan, but it is a space for people who are immigrants and folks who are Latinos, and really it's open to anyone, but it's really about prepping people to step up into boards, commissions, civic roles, leadership, and elected office.
Yeah, and I want to add, so I totally believe that creating that infrastructure to allow people to plug in and help out with the movement or a cause is the best way to make that initial introduction to a lot of youth who right now are seeing the climate crisis happening before their eyes, or they're undocumented and they want to be a part of like a movement, helping with the driver cards, or so I think when you bring an issue to the community that youth can relate to, that's how you can do firsthand engagement, because then they're going to see, oh, that's something I want to be a part of. How do I sign up? And so I think programs like like Turno, for example, even some civic engagement campaigns that from East County Rising, those are the kinds of opportunities that can help people say, oh, I want to be part of that. And some civic engagement campaigns we're working on are what we're doing is also the census work. So we're looking at how can we engage people in communicating, hey, the importance of filling out the census, right? When people don't fill it out, that means that there's going to be less resources allocated to where we live, and that's also going to put at stake our shot of getting a 6th congressional seat. And so what does that mean? Less representation. So that's just one example of a few other campaigns that East County Rising is working on, as like parks and affordable housing, that youth and other folks can probably see themselves reflected and say, I want to be part of that. All right, who else has a question? We have about time for probably one more. So figure it out. Stay tight. Okay. Here, Brett, get the vote. I think you want the microphone to post the live stream. Yeah.
I could be one of these people, but I'm going to be one of these people that just says, it's not exactly a question. Thank you so much from the depths of me, okay? When you're talking about your story about your mother, I called the police on my father when I was 9 years old. And when I was 39 years old, I sued the police department in federal court for not providing protection for domestic violence survivors, okay? So, but what I've been so struck with in this panel is, I just came out of the rural one, and I'm hearing the validation of things that are so crucial to me right now as a rural organizer, is that we have to listen to our people. And white, poor, rural people have the same othering as people of color. Some of the name tags are different, but violent, lazy, don't go to work, don't vote, all this kind of nonsense things, right, is all directed towards these folks that live down holler someplace also. But what I'm hearing on their side is, don't knock on those doors, because there's crazy people down there, and run as a non-affiliated person because we don't want to threaten anybody. And we have to give voice to those people who are being disenfranchised also. And I just really, really appreciate what you had to say today that will help me carry that forward.
Okay, you actually have time for one more. So can I say something really quickly? Oh, sure.
I did not get a chance to come back and tell you all about the census, but I'm glad that you touched on it. So if everyone could go online and check out WeCount. There is a coalition of 13 organizations around the state, including Unite Oregon, PCUN, East County Rising, and APANO, which is, you're not from Apana, but, they're the Asian, yeah.
I'm a member.
Pacific Islander, I don't know what the whole acronym stands for, but they do amazing work. So there are 13 different organizations that are all gonna be working on this. You all can help. Your community members need to know how important it is to be counted and that they have your support. There are a lot of ways to get involved. You can knock on doors, you can make phone calls, you can help get out just the word on social media. So check that out, and I just wanted to plug that.
Is it WeCount.org? Is that all it is?
If you just look up hashtag WeCountOregon, you should get to it, and I will memorize the URL.
I also wanted to say something else about the census that I think will be intriguing to all of us in this room, is that we are on a track to get a 6th congressional district. So this, the census does count because then we could see increased representation from the state of Oregon, and who knows who that person may be or who she may be.
It's .com, by the way.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Yeah. So
WeCountOregon.com, you heard it here.
yeah. All right. So we have time for one more. Sorry, did you want to go first? Or
It's probably not quick, so if there's
We can answer questions afterwards.
okay, we can also stick around and answer questions. Okay. Well, thank you everybody so much for joining us.
So I have a question. So I live in a neighborhood with a lot of immigrants too, but I live in a neighborhood with a lot of immigrants too, but they're highly educated. Are they voting and participating or not? That means
Knock on their door and ask them.
I did go door to door asking that neighborhood a few years ago, and they said, "Oh, that's a citizen," and they would point to the children. But by now they would have been on track to become citizens, but or they could have been. But I don't know whether they are. I mean, is that another area of non-participation?
That's why engagement is so important in organizing, doing the door to door, right? Like getting to know your neighbor, getting to know who lives in your neighborhood.
Hi Jody, I live in your district, and I canvassed for County Commissioner District 2, and I to my surprise too, I ran into a lot of households that were occupied by communities of color, and I was like shocked, just because I've grown up just suburbia the whole time. And so I would say that they were on my list, and this was like the first time that I think somebody has come to their door as well. And they're mostly there's a big Southeast Asian community in the Bethany area, and so they're definitely there, and they were definitely on the list, and their doors have been knocked on. So yeah, I hope that answers your question. Yeah.
So I'm going to follow what everyone else said and encourage you to knock on those doors. But I'm also going to encourage us to not think of people who can't vote as not being able to participate. Because throughout my campaign, there were several people who couldn't vote, but could help us set up for events, help us table, help us translate things. They went door to door with me, and so you don't have to be a citizen to go door to door. You don't have to be a citizen to inspire other people to take action. And so I think through the census work, through whatever it is that we're doing, political campaigns or organizing, we should go to those doors, one, to build relationship by introducing ourselves as neighbors, and two, try to understand what people care about. And so the solution to what they care about might not be voting this time. It might be organizing on another issue. It might be taking the census. But let's all of us try to find out what is it that's making our communities tick, and then helping them connect to an outlet, right?
Okay. Well, folks, that wraps up our panel for today. So thank you everybody for joining us today, and everyone on the live stream. Thank you to our panelists.